This is the story of one of the darkest chapters in criminal history in the Missouri Ozarks during the late 19th century. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a like on this video. What you are about to hear is not folklore. It is not legend embellished by time. This is a meticulously documented case that has confounded historians, medical professionals, and law enforcement officials for over a century. In the winter of 1889, in a remote settlement nestled deep within the Ozark Mountains, 23 people vanished over the course of 4 months. Only 7 survivors emerged to tell their story, and what they described defied every rational explanation available to the authorities of that era. The official records, preserved in the Stone County Historical Archives, tell one story. But the documents that were deliberately hidden, the testimonies that were suppressed, and the evidence that was buried, they tell something far more disturbing. The Ozark Mountains of southern Missouri in the 1880s represented one of the last true frontiers of American settlement. The region's rugged terrain, dense forests, and isolated hollows created communities that existed almost entirely separate from the rapidly modernizing world beyond their borders. Stone County, established in 1851, remained sparsely populated, even by frontier standards. By 1889, the entire county claimed fewer than 3,000 residents scattered across hundreds of square miles of unforgiving wilderness. Crow's Hollow was not marked on any official map. The settlement consisted of approximately 40 families, primarily subsistence farmers and hunters who had claimed land in a narrow valley carved by Blackwater Creek. The nearest established town, Galena, lay 18 miles to the south over treacherous mountain roads that became impassable during winter months. For the residents of Crow's Hollow, isolation was not merely geographical, it was existential. They were born, lived, and died within a radius of perhaps 5 miles, their entire universe contained within the shadow of the surrounding peaks. Into this isolated world came Esther Wainwright in the spring of 1881. Records from the Stone County Clerk's office indicate that Esther arrived from Ohio, though no documentation exists regarding her passage or the circumstances that brought an educated woman to such a remote location. What is documented, preserved in the diary of Reverend Thomas Caldwell, who served the scattered communities of eastern Stone County, is that Esther was approximately 35 years old upon her arrival, unmarried, and possessed medical training that far exceeded anything available in the region. Esther established herself as a midwife, and according to birth records, cross-referenced by Dr. Helen Varnum of Southwest Missouri State University, in her 1976 dissertation, Medical Practices in Frontier Ozark Communities, Esther Wainwright attended at least 63 documented births between 1881 and 1889. Her success rate was extraordinary. In a time and place where maternal and infant mortality claimed nearly 1 in 4 mothers and 1 in 3 children, Esther lost only 2 patients in 8 years, both elderly women succumbing to complications no medical intervention of that era could have prevented. The people of Crow's Hollow trusted Esther Wainwright. They called upon her in their darkest hours, invited her into their homes, and placed their lives in her hands. But in the final months of 1889, that trust would transform into terror. 23 people would disappear, and Esther Wainwright would be accused of crimes so grotesque that even the hardened frontier lawmen who investigated the case would refuse to speak publicly about what they discovered. The question that haunts researchers to this day is simple. Was Esther Wainwright a serial killer who exploited her position to prey upon the vulnerable? Or was something far stranger occurring in those isolated mountains, something that authorities of the 1880s had no framework to understand or explain? The events that would come to be known as the Crow's Hollow disappearances began, according to official records, on October 12, 1889. The Stone County Sheriff's Department incident log, preserved in the Missouri State Archives in Jefferson City, contains a terse entry dated October 15, 1889. Report received from Galena merchant Samuel Hodges regarding overdue supply delivery to Crow's Hollow settlement. Weather has been clear, route should be passable. Samuel Hodges operated the largest general store in Galena, and his ledgers, now held by the Stone County Historical Society, show that Crow's Hollow residents typically made supply runs every 3 to 4 weeks. By mid-October, the settlement was nearly 6 weeks overdue. On October 16th, Deputy Marshal James Brennan and 2 civilian volunteers made the 18-mile journey into the mountains. What they found was documented in Deputy Brennan's official report, written in his distinctive, precise handwriting and filed on October 18, 1889. The document runs to 7 pages, unusual length for frontier law enforcement reports of that era. Deputy Brennan was a Civil War veteran, a man who had witnessed the carnage at Shiloh and Atlanta. His report is notable for its clinical detachment, but also for what Dr. Patricia Renshaw, a forensic psychologist at the University of Missouri, who analyzed the document in 2003, described as linguistic markers consistent with severe psychological trauma. Deputy Brennan's party arrived in Crow's Hollow on the afternoon of October 16th. The settlement appeared deserted. Cooking fires had burned down to cold ash. Livestock wandered unfenced through yards and gardens. Doors stood open to homes, their interiors undisturbed but empty of human presence. Most disturbing, according to Brennan's report, was the complete absence of any signs of struggle, flight, or violence. Personal belongings remained in place. Food sat on tables, spoiled but untouched by scavengers. It was, Brennan wrote, as if the residents had simply stood up and walked away mid-task with no thought to return. The search party called out repeatedly as they moved through the settlement. Their voices echoed off the surrounding peaks, but no human response came. They did, however, note sounds that Brennan described as not right for the time and season. Specifically, he documented hearing bird calls that were wrong in their timing and melody, and an absence of the usual forest sounds that should have accompanied an autumn afternoon in the Ozarks. It was nearly dusk when they found the first survivors. 7 people, 5 adults and 2 children, were discovered huddled together in the root cellar of the settlement's small church, a structure that also served as schoolhouse and community meeting hall. The survivors were in a state of extreme distress. According to Brennan's report, they were unresponsive to questioning, eyes vacant, clothes soiled, and bearing no apparent physical injuries, despite obvious signs of prolonged terror. The survivors were identified as Marcus Webb, 42, farmer, Sarah Webb, 39, his wife, their children Ruth, 9, and Michael, 6, Thomas Greer, 58, blacksmith, Mary Catherine Hollis, 27, schoolteacher, and Elizabeth Yunt, 63, widow. All were residents of Crow's Hollow. All had been present during whatever events had unfolded. None of them could or would explain what had happened. Deputy Brennan made the decision to evacuate the survivors immediately, despite the approaching darkness. His report states, "The settlement presented conditions that, while I cannot articulate a specific threat, created in all 3 members of our party a profound and immediate conviction that remaining after nightfall would be inadvisable." The party made the treacherous mountain journey by moonlight, arriving in Galena near midnight. The survivors were placed under the care of Dr. Josiah Whitmore, Galena's only physician. Dr. Whitmore's medical notes, discovered by researcher David Kelton in 1982 during an inventory of materials being transferred from a closed medical practice to the Missouri Medical Association archives, provide the first detailed description of the survivors' condition. Dr. Whitmore noted that all 7 exhibited symptoms consistent with extreme shock. Their pupils were dilated despite bright lamplight. Their pulses were rapid and irregular. They spoke in fragmented, often nonsensical phrases when they spoke at all. Most notably, Dr. Whitmore observed that all 7 bore identical marks on their left wrists, circular bruising approximately 2 inches in diameter, with what he described as a pattern suggesting pressure applied with great force by something of regular geometric shape, though I cannot identify what implement might create such a mark. Over the following 48 hours, as the survivors began to emerge from their traumatic stupor, fragments of testimony emerged. These early statements, taken by Deputy Brennan and later by Sheriff Augustus Cole himself, are inconsistent and contradictory. However, certain elements appear repeatedly across multiple witness accounts. All 7 survivors agreed that the trouble began with Esther Wainwright's return from what she called her autumn gathering. Esther had left the settlement on October 10th, explaining that she needed to collect specific medicinal plants and roots that grew only in certain remote areas of the mountains. Such trips were not unusual. Esther regularly ventured into the forest to gather supplies for her practice. She typically returned within a day or two. This time she was gone for 5 days. When Esther returned on October 15th, multiple witnesses reported that she seemed changed. Sarah Webb stated, "Her eyes looked through you, not at you, like she was seeing something else entirely." Thomas Greer noted, "She brought back plants I'd never seen before, and I've lived in these mountains 40 years. Mary Catherine Hollis, the schoolteacher and thus the most educated of the survivors, provided the most detailed observation. She brought back a collection of botanical specimens that did not correspond to any flora native to this region. When I inquired about their origin, she smiled in a manner I found deeply unsettling and stated only that she had been shown where they grow." On the evening of October 15th, Esther called a community meeting at the church. According to the survivors, this was not unusual. Esther occasionally provided instruction on health matters or shared knowledge about medicinal preparations. Approximately 30 people attended, nearly the entire adult population of the settlement. The 7 survivors had not attended for various reasons. Marcus Webb and his family, because their daughter Ruth had a fever. Thomas Greer, because of a leg injury. Mary Catherine Hollis, because she was preparing lessons. Elizabeth Yount, because she was caring for Mary Catherine's boarding house in the teacher's absence. What occurred at that meeting, the survivors could not say, because none of them were present. What they could report was what happened after. According to multiple accounts, those who attended the meeting did not return to their homes that night. Family members who went to check on loved ones found the church empty, doors standing open, lanterns still burning. The attendees had vanished. Searches conducted that night and throughout the following day found no trace of the missing residents. No tracks led away from the church. No signs of struggle existed inside the building. The missing had simply ceased to exist within the boundaries of the settlement, but they had not gone far. Because over the next 3 days, the remaining residents of Crow's Hollow reported encounters that defied explanation. Marcus Webb reported that on the night of October 16th, he saw his neighbor, John Pritchard, standing in the woods at the edge of his property. John had been among those who attended Esther's meeting. Marcus called out to him, relieved to see him apparently safe. But John did not respond. He simply stood, motionless, staring at the house. When Marcus approached with a lantern, John retreated into the forest with movements Marcus described as wrong, like his joints bent in directions they shouldn't. Marcus did not follow. Sarah Webb reported waking on the morning of October 17th to find her sister Agnes Cooper standing beside her bed. Agnes had attended the meeting. Sarah reached out to touch her sister's hand and reported that Agnes's skin was cold as January ice and damp, like she'd been underground. When Sarah screamed, Agnes turned and walked out of the house, moving, according to Sarah's testimony, without any hurry but also without any of the small movements people make, like she was being pulled on strings. Similar encounters occurred throughout October 17th and 18. The missing were seen at the edges of the settlement, always at dawn or dusk, always motionless until observed, then retreating into the forest with that same disturbing gait. They never spoke. They never came close enough to be touched after that first encounter. They simply watched. On the evening of October 18th, Esther Wainwright herself appeared. She walked through the center of the settlement, in broad view of the remaining residents. According to Thomas Greer's testimony, she moved with purpose and direction toward the church. Those who saw her reported that she appeared like Esther, but somehow not, as if something was wearing her face. The 7 survivors barricaded themselves in the church's root cellar. They remained there in complete darkness and silence for 3 days until Deputy Brennan's party arrived. During those 3 days in the cellar, the survivors reported hearing sounds from above. Footsteps on the church floor, moving in patterns Mary Catherine Hollis described as rhythmic but purposeless, like a dance or ritual. Voices that might have been human but spoke in no language any of them recognized. And once, on what they believed was the second night, the sound of the root cellar's door being tried. The door held. Whatever was above did not force it. After a long silence, the footsteps retreated. When Deputy Brennan opened that door on October 21st, the 7 survivors emerged into an empty settlement. The missing were gone. Esther Wainwright was gone, and Crow's Hollow stood silent in the autumn sunshine, a monument to an event that no one could explain and that officially never happened. The official investigation into the Crow's Hollow disappearances began on October 22, 1889, when Sheriff Augustus Cole arrived from the county seat with a delegation that included Dr. Josiah Whitmore, Reverend Thomas Caldwell, and 3 additional deputies. The investigative file, catalogued as Case File 1889-47 in the Stone County Sheriff's Department records and transferred to the Missouri State Archives in 1964, provides a detailed account of the initial findings, though contemporary researchers have noted significant gaps and inconsistencies in the documentation. Sheriff Cole was 54 years old in 1889, a former Union cavalry officer who had served as Stone County's chief law enforcement officer since 1876. His reputation, according to newspaper accounts preserved in the Galena Weekly Courier archives, was that of a methodical and unimaginative man, qualities that served him well in a region where most criminal matters involved property disputes, livestock theft, and the occasional violence born of alcohol and isolation. The Crow's Hollow case would test the limits of his investigative framework. The initial survey of the settlement took 2 full days. Sheriff Cole's team conducted a structure-by-structure search, documenting the contents of each building and cataloging personal effects. The thoroughness of this survey is evident in the surviving inventory lists, which run to 43 handwritten pages and detail everything from the number of jars in each household's root cellar to the titles of books found on shelves. This obsessive documentation was, according to a letter Cole wrote to the Missouri Attorney General on November 3, 1889, an attempt to impose order upon a situation that defied rational interpretation. The investigation revealed several disturbing facts that contradicted the initial assumption that the residents had simply fled or been abducted. First, no clothing appeared to be missing from any household. Wardrobes remained full, winter coats hung on pegs despite the approaching cold season, and personal items such as jewelry, watches, and money remained undisturbed. If the missing had left voluntarily, they had taken nothing with them. If they had been taken by force, their captors had shown no interest in valuable or portable goods. Second, the livestock situation presented a puzzle. Animals had been left unfed and unpenned, yet they had not scattered far from the settlement. The cattle, pigs, and chickens remained within the immediate vicinity, as if an invisible boundary contained them. More disturbing, according to Dr. Whitmore's observations recorded in his personal journal, the animals exhibited extreme agitation when approached, and an apparent reluctance to enter any of the settlement structures, even barns where they had previously sheltered. Third, and most significantly, the search of Esther Wainwright's cabin revealed materials that Sheriff Cole described in his report as of a nature that suggests practices inconsistent with legitimate medical treatment. The cabin, located at the northern edge of the settlement nearest the forest, was larger than most residences in Crow's Hollow, consisting of 2 rooms, a main living area, and a separate workspace, where Esther prepared medicines and attended to patients requiring extended care. The inventory of Esther's workspace, conducted by Dr. Whitmore and witnessed by Sheriff Cole and Deputy Brennan, documented standard midwifery and frontier medical supplies, surgical instruments, bandages, various tinctures and dried herbs, medical texts including Buchan's Domestic Medicine and the American Frugal Housewife. However, the inventory also lists items that Dr. Whitmore noted as peculiar and potentially indicative of superstitious practices. A collection of what appeared to be carved wooden figures, approximately 4 inches tall, bearing crude representations of human features. Bundles of plant material that Dr. Whitmore could not identify despite his familiarity with regional flora. A ledger containing entries in a script that Reverend Caldwell examined and stated was neither English nor any language of my acquaintance, possibly cipher, and most disturbingly, a collection of small glass vials containing what appeared to be human hair, labeled with names that corresponded to residents of Crow's Hollow, both present and missing. This last discovery led Sheriff Cole to formally designate Esther Wainwright as the primary suspect in what he now classified as multiple abductions and potential murders. A warrant was issued on October 25, 1889, for Esther's arrest on charges of kidnapping, suspicion of murder, and practicing witchcraft, the latter being a rarely invoked but technically extant statute dating from Missouri's territorial period. The question of the witchcraft charge deserves examination, as it represents a significant element in understanding both the investigation and the subsequent suppression of case details. Dr. Martin Hessler, a legal historian at Washington University in St. Louis, who analyzed the case in his 1988 book Frontier Justice Law Enforcement in the Ozarks, 1850-1900, notes that witchcraft charges were virtually unheard of in post-Civil War Missouri. The fact that Sheriff Cole, described by contemporaries as a rational and pragmatic man, included such a charge suggests either political pressure from the community or his own inability to classify Esther's alleged crimes within conventional legal categories. The search for Esther Wainwright and the missing residents expanded beyond Crow's Hollow on October 26th. Sheriff Cole organized search parties consisting of deputies, civilian volunteers, and several experienced hunters and trappers familiar with the Ozark wilderness. The search focused initially on the area north of the settlement, as multiple witnesses had reported seeing the missing retreat in that direction. The search parties found nothing. No campsites, no tracks, no physical evidence of 24 people moving through the forest. This absence of evidence struck the searchers as impossible. Thomas Greer, who joined the search despite his leg injury, stated in an interview published in the Galena Weekly Courier on November 8, 1889, "I've tracked deer and bear in these mountains for 40 years. A group of people leaves signs, broken branches, disturbed ground, waste. We found nothing. It was as if they had never entered the forest at all, or as if the forest had swallowed them whole." On the fourth day of the search, October 29th, one of the civilian volunteers, a trapper named Silas Cutler, reported discovering what he described as a place that ain't right. Cutler led Sheriff Cole and 2 deputies to a location approximately 3 miles north-northwest of Crow's Hollow. The site, according to Cole's report, was a natural clearing in a hollow formed by a ring of limestone outcroppings. The clearing was roughly circular, approximately 40 feet in diameter, and exhibited characteristics that Cole struggled to articulate clearly in his official documentation. The most detailed description comes from Deputy Brennan's personal diary, which was discovered by his granddaughter in 1947 and donated to the Stone County Historical Society. Brennan's private account is significantly more forthcoming than his official reports. He describes the clearing as possessing a quality of wrongness that affected all men present, manifesting as intense unease, disorientation, and for some, acute nausea. He notes that compasses behaved erratically within the clearing, with needles spinning or pointing in inconsistent directions. Most significantly, Brennan describes the ground itself as marked with patterns. These patterns, according to Brennan's description, and a rough sketch he included in his diary, consisted of what appeared to be paths or trails worn into the earth, forming geometric shapes, circles within circles, connected by lines that radiated outward like spokes of a wheel. The patterns were subtle, visible only from certain angles in specific light, but once perceived, they were unmistakable. At the center of the design was a depression, roughly 6 feet in diameter, and perhaps a foot deep, filled with what Brennan described as ash or soil of unnatural darkness. Sheriff Cole ordered samples of the soil collected and sent to a chemist in Springfield for analysis. The results, documented in a letter from chemist Arnold Westfeld, dated November 12, 1889, indicated that the soil contained no unusual chemical properties, though the degree of organic content suggests prolonged burning or decomposition of biological material, origin uncertain. No human remains were found at the site, no clothing, tools, or any artifacts suggesting human activity. But all of the men who visited the clearing reported experiencing disturbing symptoms during and after their exposure. These symptoms, documented in letters and diaries only later discovered by researchers, included persistent nightmares, temporal disorientation and auditory hallucinations described consistently as voices speaking in the distance, just beyond the range of comprehension. Silas Cutler, the trapper who discovered the site, refused to return to the area after his initial visit. In a letter to his brother dated November 5, 1889, preserved in the Cutler family papers, now held at the University of Arkansas Special Collections, Silas wrote, "I have seen many strange things in the mountains, bones arranged in ways that suggest intelligence, trees marked with symbols no man made, places where animals refuse to go. But that clearing holds something worse. It holds waiting. Something patient and hungry waits there, and I believe with every part of my soul that Esther Wainwright found it, or it found her, and she opened a door that should have remained closed." The official investigation reached an impasse by mid-November. The missing residents had not been found, alive or dead. Esther Wainwright had vanished without trace. The physical evidence, such as it was, suggested nothing conclusive. Sheriff Cole faced increasing pressure from territorial newspapers, which had begun covering the case with headlines that ranged from sensational to mocking. The Springfield Republican ran a story on November 16, 1889, titled "The Vanishing Settlement, Mystery or Hoax in Stone County," which suggested that the entire affair might be an elaborate fraud designed to attract attention and potential settlement aid. Under this pressure, and perhaps influenced by his own inability to construct a rational narrative, Sheriff Cole made a decision that would shape the case's trajectory for the next century. On November 20, 1889, he convened a coroner's inquest with the stated purpose of providing official closure to the matter. The inquest, held in Galena over 2 days, heard testimony from the 7 survivors, members of the search parties, and various expert witnesses including Dr. Whitmore and Reverend Caldwell. The proceedings of this inquest were recorded by court stenographer Margaret Hayes, and the transcript, running to 347 pages, was preserved in the Stone County Courthouse basement until a fire in 1923 destroyed much of the building's historical records. However, a duplicate copy had been made and sent to the Missouri Attorney General's office in Jefferson City, and this copy survived. It was rediscovered in 1971 by law student Jennifer Moreau during research for her thesis on 19th-century criminal procedures. The inquest transcript reveals several crucial facts. First, the testimony of the 7 survivors remained consistent with their initial statements, but provided no additional useful information. Under intensive questioning, all 7 maintained that they had not witnessed the disappearances directly and could not provide details about what had occurred at Esther's meeting. When pressed on the matter of the wrong movements of the missing when glimpsed afterward, several survivors became extremely agitated, with Sarah Webb requiring medical attention after experiencing what Dr. Whitmore diagnosed as hysterical convulsions. Second, expert testimony focused heavily on discrediting supernatural explanations. Reverend Caldwell testified at length about the dangers of superstition and the tendency of frontier populations to attribute natural phenomena to spiritual causes. Dr. Whitmore provided medical opinions suggesting that the survivors' experiences could be explained by mass hysteria, a psychological condition he described as not uncommon in isolated populations subjected to stress and fear. Third, and most tellingly, Sheriff Cole introduced into evidence only a carefully selected portion of the materials found in Esther Wainwright's cabin. The medical supplies and standard equipment were presented and examined. The carved figures, unidentified plants, and coded ledger were not mentioned in testimony, nor were they included in the evidence inventory provided to the coroner's jury. The inquest concluded on November 22, 1889, with a verdict that Dr. Rachel Thornton, a forensic historian who analyzed the document in 2001, described as a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion. The jury found that 23 residents of the settlement known as Crow's Hollow did on or about October 15, 1889, depart said settlement under circumstances that remain unclear, but which likely involve criminal actions by one Esther Wainwright, current whereabouts unknown, and possibly others acting in concert with her. The precise fate of the missing cannot be determined from available evidence. It is the recommendation of this jury that the matter be considered suspended pending the discovery of additional evidence or the apprehension of the primary suspect. In practical terms, the inquest closed the case. Sheriff Cole filed a final report on November 30th, 1889, recommending that Crow's Hollow be declared abandoned and that the property be dealt with according to territorial statutes regarding unclaimed land. The settlement was never reoccupied. By 1895, according to county tax records, all structures had been dismantled or had collapsed due to neglect. The location reverted to wilderness. The 7 survivors dispersed. Marcus and Sarah Webb relocated to Springfield with their children, where Marcus found work as a carpenter. Thomas Greer moved in with family in Arkansas. Mary Catherine Hollis left teaching and returned to family in Illinois. Elizabeth Yunt lived with her daughter in Galena until her death in 1901. According to obituaries and census records, traced by genealogist Walter Simmons in his 2008 article, The Crow's Hollow Survivors, a genealogical study, none of the survivors ever publicly discussed the events of October 1889 after the inquest concluded. Several family letters and diary entries, discovered decades later, indicate that all 7 experienced persistent nightmares and psychological difficulties for the remainder of their lives. The official investigation was complete. The case was closed, and for 70 years, the Crow's Hollow disappearances faded into obscurity, remembered only as a footnote in county history, if remembered at all. But the story was far from over. Because in 1960, a young academic would become obsessed with this forgotten case, and his investigation would uncover evidence that suggested the mystery ran far deeper than 19th century authorities could have imagined. Dr. Robert Ashford was 31 years old in 1960 when he first encountered references to the Crow's Hollow case while researching his dissertation on frontier medicine at the University of Chicago. Ashford's academic background was impeccable. Undergraduate degree from Yale, master's work at Oxford, doctoral studies under the supervision of renowned medical historian Dr. Edmund Cartwright. His dissertation, Medical Practice and Social Structure in American Frontier Communities, 1850-1900, required extensive archival research into the daily operations of frontier medical practitioners, particularly midwives who operated in regions beyond the reach of formally trained physicians. Ashford's initial interest in Esther Wainwright was purely professional. According to his research notes, now preserved in the special collections of the University of Chicago Library, he first encountered her name in a footnote in a 1912 medical journal article discussing successful midwifery outcomes in challenging environments. The footnote mentioned Esther's exceptional success rate, but included no details about her disappearance or the events of 1889. Intrigued, Ashford began tracking down primary sources. What began as a minor tangent to his dissertation research gradually evolved into an obsession that would consume the final 17 years of Ashford's life. Between 1960 and 1977, Dr. Robert Ashford assembled what remains the most comprehensive collection of documents, testimony, and analysis regarding the Crow's Hollow case. His archive, which fills 37 boxes of materials, includes original documents, photographic reproductions, interview transcripts, scientific analyses, and over 2,000 pages of personal notes and theories. Ashford's initial research followed conventional historical methodology. He began with official records, accessing the case file at the Missouri State Archives and the inquest transcript that had been recently rediscovered. He tracked down surviving family members of the original witnesses, conducting interviews with descendants who could provide family stories and, in some cases, access to private papers and letters never previously examined by researchers. One of Ashford's most significant early discoveries came in 1962 when he located the private papers of Deputy James Brennan. Brennan's granddaughter, Mrs. Catherine Brennan Foster, had preserved her grandfather's effects, including his personal diary covering the period from 1885 to 1905. As previously mentioned, this diary contained far more detailed and disturbing descriptions of the investigation than Brennan's official reports. Ashford's analysis of the diary, published in a 1964 article in the Journal of American Frontier Studies titled "The Limits of Official Narrative," Examining the Crow's Hollow investigation through private documentation represented the first serious academic examination of the case. The article attracted attention from both academic and popular audiences. Ashford received correspondence from other researchers, from descendants of Stone County families, and from individuals who claimed knowledge of similar incidents in other locations. This correspondence, preserved in Ashford's archive, includes several letters that he marked as particularly significant. One letter, dated March 17, 1965, came from a retired forest ranger named Donald Mackenzie, who had worked in the Mark Twain National Forest, which encompasses the former location of Crow's Hollow. Mackenzie wrote, "I served in these mountains from 1938 to 1963, and I can tell you that the area you're researching has a reputation among those of us who work out here. We don't go to certain places after dark. We don't camp in certain hollows. There are rules you learn, not from any manual, but from the old-timers who've worked these mountains for generations. Break those rules, and people don't come back. I'm retired now, so I can say this. Whatever happened in 1889 didn't end in 1889. Ashford interviewed Mackenzie extensively in 1965 and 1966. The interview transcripts reveal that Mackenzie reported multiple incidents of hikers and hunters going missing in the region surrounding the former settlement, particularly in the area north-northwest of the old site where Sheriff Cole had discovered the clearing with the strange markings. Mackenzie claimed that between 1938 and 1963, at least 11 people had disappeared under circumstances that were officially attributed to accidents, animal attacks, or voluntary departure, but which he believed represented a pattern of unexplained vanishings. Following Mackenzie's information, Ashford began a new phase of research, attempting to document modern incidents that might be connected to the historical case. This work took him away from archives and into field work. Between 1966 and 1970, Ashford made repeated trips to Stone County and surrounding areas, interviewing local residents, examining missing persons reports, and, crucially, attempting to locate the sites mentioned in historical documents, including the clearing described by Deputy Brennan. Ashford's field notebooks from this period, preserved in his archive, make for disturbing reading. His entries become progressively less analytical and more personal. In a notebook dated June 1967, he describes his first visit to what he believed was the location of the historic clearing. Found the site using coordinates triangulated from landmarks mentioned in Brennan's diary and Cole's reports. The clearing is still there, remarkably unchanged from Brennan's description. The patterns in the ground remain visible, though overgrown. Compass behaved erratically, experienced severe headache and sense of dread, did not remain past sunset. Ashford returned to the site multiple times between 1967 and 1970, sometimes alone, sometimes with colleagues or research assistants. On several occasions, he attempted to conduct scientific analysis of the location, collecting soil samples, taking photographs, and even bringing in a colleague from the University of Chicago's geology department to examine the rock formations. None of these investigations revealed anything conclusive. The soil samples showed no unusual properties. The rock formations were consistent with typical Ozark limestone, yet everyone who visited the site with Ashford reported experiencing the same sensation of wrongness that had affected the 1889 searchers. In 1969, Ashford made his most significant discovery. While conducting research in the basement archives of the Stone County Courthouse, examining records that had survived the 1923 fire, he found a wooden box that had been mislabeled and stored among deed records. The box contained materials from Sheriff Cole's investigation that had never been entered into official evidence. The carved wooden figures, the unidentified plant specimens, long since dried and fragile, and most importantly, Esther Wainwright's ledger. The ledger is described in detail in Ashford's notes. It measured approximately 8 inches by 10 inches, bound in what appeared to be leather, though Ashford noted the texture was unusual, not quite like any leather I've encountered. The pages contained entries in a script that Ashford initially believed might be cipher, but later concluded was an actual language, possibly a severely degraded or corrupted form of an indigenous dialect, mixed with elements that he could not identify. Ashford spent 2 years attempting to translate the ledger. He consulted linguistic experts, anthropologists specializing in indigenous Ozark cultures, and even a cryptographer colleague from his Yale undergraduate years. No one could provide a complete translation. However, several consultants identified fragments that appeared to be related to indigenous spiritual or medicinal practices. Dr. Sarah Whitehorse, an anthropologist at the University of Oklahoma, who examined photographs of several pages in 1971, noted in a letter to Ashford, "Some of these symbols correspond to Osage spiritual notations I've encountered in other contexts, but they're being used incorrectly or perhaps combined with elements from other traditions in ways that would be considered transgressive or dangerous by practitioners of those traditions." The most disturbing aspect of the ledger, according to Ashford's analysis, was not its content but its condition. Despite being approximately 80 years old, the ledger showed minimal signs of aging. The ink remained dark and clear. The pages, while yellowed, were not brittle. Most unnervingly, Ashford reported that the ledger had a smell that he described as organic, almost like living tissue, faintly sweet and deeply unpleasant. By 1972, Ashford's research had reached a point where he believed he had assembled enough evidence to publish a comprehensive study. He took a sabbatical from his teaching duties at the University of Chicago and relocated temporarily to a rental house in Galena, Missouri, to be closer to his research materials and to conduct final fieldwork. According to correspondence with his dissertation advisor, Dr. Cartwright, Ashford planned to complete his manuscript by the end of 1973 and publish it through a university press. The manuscript was never completed, because on November 4, 1977, Dr. Robert Ashford disappeared. The circumstances of Ashford's disappearance are documented in the Stone County Sheriff's Department case file, 1977-89, and in subsequent newspaper coverage. On the morning of November 4th, Ashford left his rental house in Galena, telling his landlady, Mrs. Helen Pritchard, that he was going into the mountains to verify final details and expected to return before dark. He took with him a backpack containing research materials, a camera, a compass, and provisions for a day hike. He never returned. A search was organized on November 6th, when Mrs. Pritchard reported Ashford missing. The search party, led by Sheriff Thomas Wyatt, focused on the area north of the former Crow's Hollow settlement, as Mrs. Pritchard reported that Ashford had been visiting that region frequently. The search continued for 10 days and involved over 50 volunteers, including experienced trackers and, notably, several members of the newly formed Stone County Search and Rescue Team. The searchers found Ashford's backpack on November 9th. It was discovered approximately 3.5 miles north-northwest of the former settlement location, in an area that search coordinator Michael Brennan, grandson of Deputy James Brennan, later stated was within a quarter mile of the clearing described in my grandfather's diary. The backpack was lying on the ground, partially concealed by fallen leaves but not hidden. Its contents were intact: research notes, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a thermos of coffee, Ashford's camera with a full roll of unexposed film, and his wallet containing identification and $43 in cash. What the backpack did not contain was Ashford's copy of Esther Wainwright's ledger, which multiple witnesses confirmed he had taken with him. That ledger has never been recovered. No other trace of Dr. Robert Ashford was ever found. The official investigation concluded that he had likely become disoriented, wandered away from the trail, and succumbed to exposure or injury in terrain too rugged for his body to be easily located. This conclusion was disputed by several experienced outdoorsmen who participated in the search. In a letter to the editor published in the Stone County Chronicle on November 28, 1977, tracker Samuel Voss wrote, "I've tracked lost hikers in these mountains for 20 years. They leave signs. They disturb undergrowth. They leave scent trails. They mark their passage. Dr. Ashford left none of these signs beyond the location where his pack was found. He vanished as completely as if he had never existed, just like those people in 1889. Ashford's disappearance sent shockwaves through the academic community. His archive at the University of Chicago, was sealed pending the investigation, then later made available to researchers with certain sensitive materials restricted. Several colleagues attempted to continue his work, but none pursued it with the same intensity, and none ventured into the field sites Ashford had been investigating. The most comprehensive attempt to continue Ashford's research came from Dr. Patricia Crane, a colleague from the University of Chicago's History Department, who had corresponded with Ashford about his work. In 1982, Dr. Crane published The Ashford Archive, an overview of the Crow's Hollow research in the journal American Historical Quarterly. The article summarized Ashford's findings and included several key conclusions that he had apparently reached before his disappearance, based on notes found among his papers. According to Crane's analysis, Ashford had become convinced that the Crow's Hollow incident was not an isolated event, but part of a larger pattern of similar occurrences throughout the Ozark region, extending back to before European settlement. He had found references in various sources: missionary journals, early settler accounts, indigenous oral histories recorded by 19th-century anthropologists, to places in the mountains where the boundary grows thin and where things that hunger could cross over if certain conditions were met. More disturbingly, Ashford's final notes suggested he believed that Esther Wainwright had not been a perpetrator in the conventional sense, but rather had been used as a conduit for something else. In a note dated October 28, 1977, 1 week before his disappearance, Ashford wrote, "The question is not what Esther did to those people. The question is what was done to Esther first. The ledger is not a record of her actions, it is a record of her transformation. She was changed in those mountains, and then she changed others. The process continues. It has always continued." Dr. Crane's article concluded with a warning that many in the academic community found melodramatic and unscholarly. Dr. Ashford's disappearance under circumstances eerily similar to those he was researching suggests that this case should perhaps be left unexamined. Some mysteries serve a purpose in remaining unsolved. Some doors, once opened, should not be examined too closely by those unprepared for what lies beyond. The article damaged Dr. Crane's reputation. She published no further work on the subject and, according to colleagues, discouraged students from pursuing research into the case. When Crane retired from the University of Chicago in 1995, she donated her correspondence with Ashford to the University Archive with the stipulation that certain letters, she did not specify which, be sealed until 2050. For 20 years after Ashford's disappearance, academic interest in the Crow's Hollow case waned. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsessive research and the tendency to see patterns where none existed. The case file gathered dust. The archive remained largely unconsulted. The mountains kept their secrets, but in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a new generation of researchers, equipped with new technologies and approaches, began to re-examine the case. What they found suggested that the story was far from over, and that the events of 1889 might have continuing relevance for the present day. The digital age brought new tools for examining old mysteries. In 1998, the Missouri State Archives began a comprehensive digitization project, making historical documents accessible to researchers worldwide via the Internet. Among those who discovered the Crow's Hollow case through these newly available resources was Michael Brennan, a park ranger with the Mark Twain National Forest and, notably, the great-grandson of Deputy James Brennan, who had investigated the original 1889 incident. Michael Brennan's involvement represents a crucial bridge between historical research and contemporary field experience. Unlike academic researchers studying the case from archives, Brennan worked daily in the region where the events occurred. His position provided him access to modern incident reports, search and rescue records, and the collective knowledge of rangers, law enforcement, and local residents who worked in or lived near the former Crow's Hollow area. In a 2003 interview conducted by journalist Karen Westfield for the Springfield News Leader, Brennan stated, "I grew up hearing family stories about my great-grandfather's experience with the Crow's Hollow case. He never spoke about it publicly, but in private, within the family. He made it clear that what happened in those mountains was never resolved. When I became a ranger and started working this territory, I began to understand what he meant. Brennan's contribution to understanding the case came through his systematic documentation of modern incidents in the region. Between 1998 and 2015, he maintained a private database of anomalous events, missing persons cases, and unusual phenomena reported in the Mark Twain National Forest, specifically within a 15-mile radius of the former Crows Hollow settlement. This database, which he shared with select researchers and which was eventually obtained by the Ozarks Paranormal Research Institute in 2016, contains 73 documented incidents spanning 17 years. The incidents fall into several categories. The first category consists of missing persons cases. According to Brennan's records, corroborated by official National Park Service missing persons, data analyzed by wilderness safety researcher Dr. James Holland in his 2012 study, Vanishings in America's National Forests. The region surrounding the former Crows Hollow settlement has a statistically anomalous rate of disappearances. Between 1998 and 2015, 14 people vanished in this relatively small geographic area, compared to an expected rate of approximately 3 disappearances based on visitor numbers and terrain difficulty. The most extensively documented case involves the disappearance of a hiking group in October 2004. On October 14, 2004, exactly 115 years after Esther Wainwright's final community meeting, a group of 6 experienced hikers from the St. Louis Wilderness Club entered the Mark Twain National Forest for a weekend camping trip. The group consisted of David Holt, 41, the expedition leader, his wife Jennifer Holt, 38, Marcus and Sheila Rodriguez, both 35, and Timothy and Karen Walsh, both 29. All 6 were experienced outdoors enthusiasts with extensive hiking and camping backgrounds. The group filed a detailed trip plan with park rangers, indicating they would be camping in the Piney Creek Wilderness area, approximately 5 miles from the former Crows Hollow location. They were expected to return to the trailhead on October 17th. When they failed to appear, a search was initiated on October 18th. The search and rescue operation was one of the largest in Missouri history, involving over 200 personnel, including rangers, law enforcement, search dogs, and eventually National Guard helicopters equipped with thermal imaging equipment. The operation continued for 12 days. On October 24th, searchers located the group's campsite, which had been established at a location roughly 2 miles north of their intended camping area and approximately 3 miles from the historical Crows Hollow site. The campsite presented disturbing anomalies documented in the official search and rescue report, filed by Operation Commander Lieutenant Rachel Simmons of the Missouri State Highway Patrol. The tents were still standing and appeared to have been occupied recently. Sleeping bags were laid out inside the tents. A fire pit contained cold ashes. Food supplies remained stored properly in bear-resistant containers. Personal items including wallets, identification, car keys and cell phones were present. What was absent were the hikers themselves and, curiously, all of their clothing beyond what had been stored in packs. Lieutenant Simmons noted in her report, "The scene suggested that all 6 individuals had left the campsite simultaneously, leaving behind essential survival equipment, including their communications devices, in weather conditions that had dropped to near freezing overnight. This behavior is inconsistent with any rational decision-making process. Further, no tracks led away from the site beyond the normal disturbance one would expect from camp activities." The search expanded dramatically, covering over 50 square miles of rugged terrain. On October 29th, searchers made a discovery that Michael Brennan, who participated in the search, described as chilling in its implications. Approximately 1 mile north of the campsite, in a natural clearing formed by limestone outcroppings, searchers found items of clothing belonging to the missing hikers. The clothing was arranged in what the official report describes as a deliberate pattern on the ground, forming concentric circles with items of clothing marking specific points along the circumference. More disturbing than the arrangement was the condition of the clothing. Each item, jackets, shirts, pants, boots, was laid out as if someone had simply vanished from within them, leaving the clothing in an approximation of human form. Michael Brennan photographed the scene before it was disturbed. These photographs, which were included in Brennan's database and later analyzed by forensic investigators, show the clothing arrangements with unsettling clarity. In an annotation to one photograph, Brennan wrote, "This is the clearing. The same clearing described in my great-grandfather's diary. The patterns on the ground beneath the clothing match the patterns he drew." Forensic analysis of the clothing, conducted by the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Laboratory, revealed no blood, no signs of struggle, and no evidence of animal interference. DNA analysis confirmed that the clothing belonged to the missing hikers, but the forensic report included one anomaly that senior forensic scientist, Dr. Margaret Chen, noted in a supplemental memo. All clothing items contained trace amounts of a substance initially identified as soil or ash, but upon detailed analysis showed properties inconsistent with any local soil composition. The substance appears to be organic in origin, but contains molecular structures not found in any reference database. Further analysis inconclusive. None of the 6 hikers were ever found. The official investigation concluded that they had become disoriented, separated from their essential gear through some undetermined series of events, and perished from exposure in terrain too rugged for their remains to be located. Family members of the missing disputed this conclusion, noting that all 6 were experienced outdoorsmen, unlikely to make such fundamental survival errors simultaneously. Jennifer Holt's sister, Barbara Crane, launched an independent investigation and hired private investigator Thomas Merritt to examine the case. Merritt's report, completed in 2006 and obtained by journalist Karen Westfield through a Freedom of Information request, stated, "This case contains elements that do not conform to any pattern of wilderness disappearance in my 30 years of investigative experience. The evidence suggests a level of coordination or simultaneity in the group's actions that would require either mass delusion or external compulsion. Neither explanation is satisfactory." The 2004 disappearances attracted media attention and speculation. Several articles appeared in regional newspapers and outdoor recreation magazines, most focusing on wilderness safety and the dangers of inadequate preparation. But Michael Brennan recognized patterns that connected this case to the historical events of 1889. The timing in mid-October, the proximity to the original site, the northward trajectory of the victims' movements, and most significantly, the discovery of a site matching his great-grandfather's description of the clearing, where patterns marked the ground. Brennan's database documents other concerning patterns. Between 2004 and 2015, there were 37 reports from hikers, hunters, and Forest Service personnel of encounters with individuals exhibiting unusual behavior in the region surrounding the former Crow's Hollow settlement. These reports share remarkable consistency in their descriptions. A typical report, filed by Hunter Gerald Tompkins on November 3, 2007, states, "I observed what appeared to be a woman standing motionless approximately 100 yards from my deer stand at approximately 6:15 a.m. She was dressed inappropriately for the weather in what looked like a light-colored dress or gown. She stood without moving for approximately 5 minutes. When I called out to her, asking if she needed help, she turned and walked into the dense forest with movements I can only describe as mechanical or unnatural. I did not follow." Similar reports describe figures seen at dawn or dusk, always motionless until observed, always retreating into the forest when approached, always moving with that same wrong or unnatural gait. In 12 cases, witnesses reported that the figures appeared to be wearing outdated clothing, consistent with late 19th or early 20th century styles. In 6 cases, witnesses reported that the figures appeared familiar, resembling people the witnesses knew, though this was determined to be impossible upon later verification. Of particular concern to Brennan were reports involving children. Between 2008 and 2012, 4 separate incidents occurred in which hikers reported encountering children alone in the forest, far from any trails or camping areas. When approached, these children either fled or, in 2 cases, stood motionless until the witness drew near, then disappeared into the forest with impossible speed. In one incident, documented in a report filed by Ranger Susan O'Malley on August 15, 2010, The ranger attempted to follow a child she encountered, believing the child to be lost. She reported, "The child, a girl I estimated to be 8 to 10 years old, wearing what looked like a nightgown, walked into a dense thicket of undergrowth that should have been impassable without significant noise and disturbance. I heard nothing. When I reached the thicket seconds later, there was no sign of passage, no broken branches, no footprints, nothing. The most recent and perhaps most disturbing evidence comes from the proliferation of trail cameras and personal recording devices. Hunters and wildlife researchers have increasingly deployed motion-activated cameras throughout American forests, capturing thousands of hours of footage of wildlife and, occasionally, something else. In 2013, wildlife biologist Dr. Raymond Chen was conducting a study of black bear populations in the Mark Twain National Forest. His research required deploying 30 motion-activated cameras throughout a 200-square-mile study area. Several of these cameras were positioned within the zone surrounding the former Crows Hollow settlement. The cameras operated continuously from March through November 2013, capturing over 50,000 images of wildlife. 3 of the cameras, all positioned within 3 miles of the historical Crows Hollow site, captured images that Dr. Chen described in his research notes as anomalous and disturbing. These images, time-stamped at various dates between April and October 2013, always between the hours of 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., or between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m., show human figures in the forest. The images are of poor quality, as motion-activated cameras produce grainy, often blurred photographs, especially in low light conditions, but certain details are visible. The figures appear to be adults and children of various ages. They are often standing motionless, directly facing the camera as if aware of its presence. Their clothing appears light-colored and does not match modern hiking or outdoor apparel. Most disturbing are the figures' faces, which in several images appear elongated or distorted, in ways Dr. Chen initially attributed to camera malfunction or motion blur. Dr. Chen reported these images to park authorities and noted in his final research report, "While conducting this study, I encountered technical anomalies with 3 of 30 deployed cameras. These cameras, despite being identical models to the others and being properly maintained, produced a number of images that do not correspond to any known wildlife. I cannot explain these images and have excluded them from my wildlife data set." When Michael Brennan reviewed these images in 2014, he recognized similarities to historical descriptions from the 1889 case. Figures standing motionless, appearing at dawn or dusk, exhibiting characteristics that witnesses struggled to articulate but consistently described as wrong or not right. Brennan attempted to locate the exact positions where Chen's cameras had been deployed and to position his own cameras at those sites. His efforts produced mixed results. Some cameras functioned normally, others malfunctioned repeatedly, producing corrupted data or dying despite fresh batteries. 2 cameras disappeared entirely, despite being securely mounted to trees. The one camera that produced useful footage, operated by Brennan from October 2014 through March 2015, captured 18 images that he classified as anomalous. These images, which Brennan provided to the Ozarks Paranormal Research Institute, and which have since been analyzed by several photographic experts, show figures consistent with those captured by Dr. Chen's cameras. More disturbingly, they show what appears to be the same figure appearing multiple times across the 6-month deployment, suggesting either a return pattern or a persistent presence. One particular image, captured on October 15, 2014, 125 years to the day after Esther Wainwright's final community meeting, shows a female figure standing approximately 30 feet from the camera. The image is clearer than most trail camera photographs, captured in the brief window of dawn light. The figure wears a long dress or gown consistent with late 19th century style. Her face is turned toward the camera. Michael Brennan, in a note accompanying this image in his database, wrote, "I cannot confirm this with certainty, but I have compared this image to the only known photograph of Esther Wainwright, taken in 1884 and preserved in the Stone County Historical Society collection. The resemblance is striking. In 2015, Michael Brennan ceased his active investigation of the Crow's Hollow phenomena. In an email to colleague and researcher Dr. Timothy Walsh dated March 3, 2015, Brennan explained his decision. "I've documented what I can document. The evidence suggests that something initiated in 1889 remains active in these mountains. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it can be stopped or if it should be engaged with at all. What I do know is that my great-grandfather spent the rest of his life troubled by what he saw, Dr. Ashford disappeared while investigating it, and I've begun experiencing symptoms, insomnia, intrusive thoughts, temporal disorientation that I recognize from historical accounts. I'm withdrawing from this research for my own well-being and that of my family." Brennan left his position with the National Forest Service in 2016 and relocated to Colorado. He has declined all subsequent interview requests and has not returned to Missouri. His database remains the most comprehensive collection of modern evidence related to the Crow's Hollow case. Researchers who have examined it note that it documents a consistent pattern of anomalous activity spanning nearly 2 decades, concentrated in a specific geographic area, and bearing remarkable similarities to events that occurred 115 years earlier. The question that haunts those who study this evidence is not whether something unusual occurs in these mountains. The documentation is too extensive, from too many independent sources to dismiss entirely. The question is what is occurring, and more urgently, whether it represents an ongoing threat. 23 people entered Crow's Hollow in the autumn of 1889 to attend a meeting called by their trusted midwife, Esther Wainwright. Only 7 emerged, traumatized and unable to explain what had occurred. The missing were never found, alive or dead. Esther Wainwright vanished without trace. The official investigation concluded with no definitive answers, and the case was classified as suspended, awaiting evidence that never materialized. More than 135 years later, the Crow's Hollow case remains unsolved. Despite extensive investigation by 19th century authorities, despite Dr. Robert Ashford's obsessive research in the 1960s and 1970s, despite modern forensic capabilities and technology, we are no closer to understanding what happened in those mountains than Sheriff Augustus Cole was in November 1889. What we do know is that the incidents did not end in 1889. The pattern of disappearances, the sightings of figures moving with unnatural gaits, the reports of locations where compasses fail and experienced outdoorsmen become disoriented, these phenomena have continued across more than a century. The mountains that swallowed 23 residents of a frontier settlement continue to claim victims. The clearing where patterns mark the ground continues to exert its influence. And something that may once have been Esther Wainwright continues to appear at the boundaries between forest and settlement, between darkness and light, between one state of being and another. The academic community has largely abandoned serious study of the Crow's Hollow case. The disappearance of Dr. Robert Ashford serves as a stark warning about the dangers of pursuing certain lines of inquiry too aggressively. The case has been relegated to the margins, discussed in whispers at academic conferences, referenced obliquely in papers about frontier mysteries, but rarely examined with the rigor it deserves. Perhaps this reluctance is justified. Perhaps some phenomena exist beyond our capacity to understand or safely engage with. Perhaps the smartest response to the Crow's Hollow mystery is to acknowledge its existence, mark the territory as dangerous, and maintain a respectful distance. But for those who hike, hunt, or work in the Missouri Ozarks, particularly in Stone County and the Mark Twain National Forest, certain precautions should be observed. These are not official recommendations. They cannot be, as no government agency would formally acknowledge the basis for such warnings, but they represent the collective wisdom of rangers, experienced outdoorsmen, and local residents who know these mountains. If you encounter an isolated clearing marked by patterns in the ground, circular arrangements of stones, or areas where the forest seems unnaturally silent, leave immediately. Do not photograph the site. Do not collect samples. Do not camp nearby. Trust your instincts. If a location feels wrong, it is wrong. If you see figures in the forest standing motionless, particularly at dawn or dusk, Do not approach them. Do not call out to them. Do not attempt to help them. Move away calmly, but quickly. Do not look back. If you find personal items, clothing, or equipment arranged in patterns on the forest floor, do not touch them. Mark the location if possible, report it to authorities, and leave the area. Never hike alone in the region surrounding the former Crow's Hollow settlement, particularly in October. Never camp within 5 miles of the site. Never visit after dark. And if you encounter a woman in outdated clothing who offers knowledge, who promises to show you where things grow, who speaks with authority about matters beyond conventional understanding, refuse. Politely, firmly, refuse. And leave that place immediately. The residents of Crow's Hollow trusted Esther Wainwright. She had earned that trust through years of service, through successful births, through helping their community survive in harsh conditions. That trust made them vulnerable to whatever she became, or whatever used her to reach them. 23 people entered those mountains in 1889. 7 came back, broken. 16 others vanished entirely. Dr. Robert Ashford entered those same mountains in 1977. He never returned. 6 experienced hikers camped near that location in 2004. They are still missing. How many others across 135 years? How many disappeared in the time before records were kept, or in incidents that were attributed to mundane causes? The case of Esther Wainwright, the midwife branded a witch, remains open. Not in any official capacity. The file was closed in 1889, but in a deeper sense, in the sense that matters to those who live and work in those mountains, the case has never closed. Because whatever began in the autumn of 1889 continues, the clearing remains. The patterns persist, and figures that should not exist continue to walk the boundaries of what we understand and what we fear. The missing may be closer than you imagine. They may be watching from the tree line at dawn. They may be standing motionless in clearings you pass without seeing. They may be waiting for the next person who wanders too far, who stays too late, who accepts an invitation that should be refused. In the Missouri Ozarks, in the region that once held a settlement called Crow's Hollow, something waits, something patient, something that has claimed victims across more than a century and shows no sign of being satisfied. The question is not whether it will claim more. The question is who will be next. Will